some time studying your church planting predecessors, the apostles, you might notice that those who first expanded the church never did it alone. There's a clear pattern of pastoral partnership that starts with Jesus himself. Mark records that Jesus gathered the disciples together, but then he sent them out in pairs and gave them authority over unclean spirits. In Luke 10, Jesus sent missional Christians ahead of him, again in pairs, to every town and place where he himself was about to go. This pattern of missionary partnership continued as the church at Antioch commissioned their first pair of missionaries, Paul and Barnabas. In fact, the Apostle Paul, history's most famous church planter, took partners on his missionary journeys. Barnabas, Aristarchus, John Mark, Tychius, Onesimus, Gaius, all of these were mentioned in the New Testament as Paul's companions during his church planting endeavors. Pastoral partners were so vital to the ministry of church planting that in the New Testament that planters were instructed to continue working in teams even after the church was established. When I started working to plant a church, I noticed this pattern and I invited a friend from college to join me in the work. We worked side by side for a few years, and eventually that companion became our first church planter. Our young congregation had the privilege of sending him after just a year or two. The experience of working in ministry with this ministry companion and the clear precedent for pastoral partnership that I see in the New Testament has made me a firm believer in pastoral teams. There are at least 4 practical advantages to pastoral partnerships. The first is rapid multiplication. Maybe the most obvious advantage of planting with a pastoral partner is that you don't have to spend years preparing a member from your congregation to plant a new church. If the partner you choose is qualified and already aspires to plant a church himself, you will likely be ready to plant again within the first few years of your ministry. Because the only thing it takes to multiply is a ready leader to send. In many of my church planting endeavors, one of my pastoral partners has been the first and most obvious choice to send when that time comes for our congregation. A second reason is burden sharing. Church planting is hard. It's hard on you and your family. It's hard on your schedule. It's hard on your budget. And it's even harder if you try to do it all alone. Sharing the burden with someone else actually does make it lighter. One of the leaders in my church frequently reminds me that working together multiplies our joys and it divides our burdens. There will be days when you do not want to work. There will be days when you wake up and you look out of the window of your small apartment to the community that God's called you to reach, and you'll just want to go back to bed. And if you're working all alone, you just might. Pastoral partnership will help you bear the burdens associated with missionary work. Third, work volume. A funny thing happens when you start talking to people about their spiritual lives. You realize pretty quickly that people don't like to talk about their spiritual lives. You may volunteer in the community or meet people in a coffee shop or visit patients in a hospital. And for every 20 people you talk to, typically only 1 or 2 of them will show any interest in what you have to say. In order to make real progress toward your goals, you'll have to talk to a tremendous number of people. With 2 or more people at work each day, the work goes much faster. In my observation, those church planners that work in teams have more staying power, and the churches that they lead become stable and fruitful sooner. And last, accountability. Planting a church opens up the floodgates for spiritual warfare. Satan will try to attack you and your family at every vulnerable point. A good pastoral partner will shield you from many of the enemy's darts. Satan usually attacks when you're isolated, you're alone, you're vulnerable, you're without accountability. Keeping someone by your side in the work of the ministry will shield you from many of the temptations you'll face as a church planter. When working alone, it's much easier to compromise, to cut corners, to skip important steps. but having a pastoral partner helps you stay on track. You and your partner will work together to make plans for every aspect of this new church's ministry, and you'll also work hard to hold each other to those plans you make. A pastoral partner is a capable and qualified individual, eager to join you in the day-to-day work of church planting. This person should be as capable for the work as you and wholly dedicated to the establishment of this new church just as you are. The right pastoral partner is someone who shares your philosophy of ministry and your theological positions. If you're not careful in the selection process, there's a good chance that you might find yourself in conflict over issues in the new church. Choosing somebody you know well and you've worked with well in the past is a good idea. Since your pastoral partner will be a close comrade in the work, you should first consider individuals that are closest to you, maybe even in your own sending church. Your pastoral partner will work with you in making decisions regarding the church, so take time and make sure that you make a good decision on this one. A pastoral partner is not an intern or an assistant or an apprentice. It's not someone you're training for future ministry. You're not this person's boss or mentor. Seeing your partner as an underling or an assistant will undermine their investment. Share the equity of leadership with those who are trustworthy. Now, to be clear, I'm not against the idea of having interns or assistants in the work of church planting, but those who act in these positions serve a distinct role from that. You should assume that since God has called you to this work, He's also calling others into it. If God's called you to plant a church, He also intends to give you all of the people and all of the resources you need to accomplish it. Be looking for evidence that God's calling somebody else to partner with you, and maybe somebody you wouldn't expect. Ask yourself whether this person has the character required to take your place if you were no longer available. A lot of church planting teams make the distinction between lead pastors and associate pastors. But for church planters, I think it's sometimes more helpful to think in terms of long-term pastor and short-term pastor. So how do you find these pastoral partners? Let me give you 3 simple suggestions. First, look for someone who's willing to make personal sacrifices in order to participate. Generally, you don't want to have to talk somebody into being your pastoral partner. If you're dragging the person along in the initial stages, you'll probably find yourself dragging them along as the work progresses. You want a partner who feels as called to this work as you do. Second, look for someone whose gifts are complementary to your own. If you're a dreamer and you have difficulty with practical matters, look for somebody who's intensely practical. If you're an introvert and given to much study and preparation, look for somebody who's an extrovert and given to relationships and community. And last, look for somebody who may serve as a future church planter. Since your desire is to plant a church that multiplies, consider a person who has aspirations also to become a church planter. Once you've found somebody you think could be a good fit, get the affirmation of your sending church and others you trust before inviting them into a partnership. Remember that it's always easier to invite somebody into a position than it is to remove them from a position. So be sure that you're confident you have the right partner before you proceed.